This is the greatest common denominator between the world's greatest horizontal athletes, because this is the greatest point of force in horizontal speed and jumping. But only that has been tested. We don't have studies on what the greats can do, but even doing this is proven to reduce hamstring injury by as much as 50%, and we have.
Coach Vance here, senior international weightlifting coach and professor of sport and exercise science. That was feet under knees guy making some very bold claims about the Nordic hamstring curl. Not only will it prevent all of your hamstring related injuries, but it will make you a world-class sprinter in the process. So in this video, we're going to take a little bit of a deep dive and explore how true that actually is. Anytime you're talking about a transfer of an exercise, especially into sporting skills, like does the Nordic hamstring curl make you faster in sprinting, it gets very complicated. It's not as easy as one exercise automatically leads to the improvement of another. You have a couple categories. You have what you consider general exercises. I make myself stronger, which leads to better performance when I actually practice these skills in the future. Or I do this exercise, and even without training the other exercises, I just get faster because it has a direct transfer. He described sprinting as horizontal, which that's a point of contention already, because a lot of people would say sprinting is a vertical motion, right? You're essentially jumping from one leg to another. So this idea that it could automatically make you faster is what we want to look into a little bit further. So this meta-analysis actually shows that the Nordic hamstring curl does increase sprint performance, but only for the first 10 meters, which makes sense because during the drive phase is when you have the most amount of knee extension, which is what the hamstrings actually do. There's no data that shows that it increases top speed, and we also don't have comparative studies to show that another exercise like machine hamstring curls, things that involve concentric hamstring work are less superior, no difference, or possibly even superior to the Nordic hamstring curl to increase sprint performance. Assuming that an eccentric overload exercise would make you faster is a good assumption. At high speeds especially, the eccentric forces that you have to absorb are much higher. And also the assumption that that might be a substantial cause of injury is true. It's a good assumption. But again, when you're talking about transfer of exercise, you have to look at things in a very specific manner. So a lot of sprinters do eccentric overload training, especially in things that require knee flexion, landing and that sort of thing, drop jumps and whatnot. What they're really trying to do is essentially overcome the ground reaction forces that you're producing at the hip joint. You might be producing 600 and 900 pounds per square inch at the hip. That is forced into the ground. You have to have essentially the elasticity in the Achilles tendon, the strength as well. And we actually call that stiffness. Tendon stiffness is a term that's used often. Just to assume that if your hamstrings are significantly stronger in the eccentric portion does not necessarily mean that will translate into higher speeds, especially because you're talking more about the strength comes from hip extension at top speed versus knee flexion like you would see during the drive phase. The other thing that's interesting is when they compare the strength increases in the Nordic hamstring curl to the eccentric strength increases in actual sprinting, actual sprinting increases your eccentric strength greater than the Nordic hamstring curl. So just because an exercise is an eccentric overload exercise does not necessarily mean it leads to the same amount of strength that another exercise could use. And you could use eccentric exercises in other ways, like the flywheel, Romanian deadlift, and that sort of thing. Do those result in high enough eccentric strength to actually improve somebody's speed is always the question. So in general, in terms of speed, you know, the Nordic hamstring curl is a good option, but what we really need is some comparative studies that compare, for example, glute ham raises that would not be necessarily an eccentric overload exercise, seated hamstring curl, laying hamstring curl, and then all of the hip extension exercises like the Romanian deadlift. Do those lead to greater speed than the Nordic hamstring curl itself? I'm going to go out on a limb and say no, that it is a very weak exercise for improving top speed. But it does have some influence on the drive phase, and whether or not it's better than any other leg curl exercise, I would be skeptical